first of all, we got to say a few things about the American Revolution, right? Because there once was one. Actually, let me say a couple of things about how this all started. It's important to remember that the first rebellion against tyrannical British rule in North America occurred in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And yours truly is, I guess if I'm a native of anywhere, I'm a native of Great Barrington, Massachusetts. It is in western Massachusetts. It is the county seat of Berkshire County. And it's the place that is the first open rebellion, resistance, against British rule in North America. And let's just go to the center of Great Barrington. This place is now kind of a bohemian artist's colony, or good for rich people from New York City, but that was not always the case. You have Main Street, you have the courthouse. Now, I used to live on Church Street. We'll say a few words about that in a second. But we have the Intolerable Acts. We have the tea taxes and all the rest of it. Complete assault on self-government. And the Crown, King George III, appointed a governor. The governor was his to appoint, and then the governor would impose by decree all judges, sheriffs, and marshals. No town meetings except by consent of the governor. All agenda items approved by the governor in advance, otherwise nothing. And the courts were made responsible for enforcing these intolerable acts or coercion acts. So, and I'm reading now from published sources on the internet, confirmed, the first response to the intolerable acts in North America was in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, where 1,500 unarmed men packed the courthouse to obstruct court business. This event was the first open resistance to British rule in the North American colonies. And remember, it's interesting to note that it was not just 13 colonies. There were actually 26 British colonies in North America, including Canada, including West Florida, places that they had ripped from the French and the Spanish in the various wars. So on the front lawn of the Great Barrington Courthouse, we find a stone marker, a little bit rough-edged, but there it is. And it says, near this spot stood the first courthouse of Berkshire County, erected 1764, and here on August 16th, 1774, occurred the first open resistance to British rule in America. Now, we have the interesting historian Raphael, who writes about the upheaval in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I think that one is September 6th. But sorry, Raphael, Great Barrington takes the palm with the first open resistance to British rule and Berkshire in the Berkshire County Courthouse. And it's still there, out on the front lawn, Massachusetts historical marker placed by the town of Great Barrington. And it's there. So, the voice you're hearing from this program is the voice of a certain tradition, the revolutionary one. And that's the story of Great Barrington. Now, the other thing we want to point out, the text of the Declaration of Independence, this was the best thing Thomas Jefferson ever did. Notice, he did it under the supervision of Benjamin Franklin, who told him what to write. But, of course, Jefferson was a talented writer. Too bad that later on he was captured by the slavery interest in Virginia and turned against the central government of the United States, right? He was feuding with Hamilton. Hamilton represented the future, efficient government, self-defense against the British, economic development, and all the rest of it. Alexander Hamilton is the key man. Keep him on the $10 bill. Don't mix that one up. Better yet, get rid of that nasty Andrew Jackson, who was himself a disciple of Aaron Burr, another arch traitor. But in the case of Jefferson, he went astray The weakness of the United States revealed in the War of 1812 is largely a result of the malfeasance and nonfeasance of Jefferson. He wanted a weak central government. Why? Because a strong central government might interfere with slavery. Slavery being the big obsession of these characters at the time. However, let's look at the Declaration of Independence. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we've gone through the primacy of Great Barrington, Massachusetts in this entire enterprise of American independence, then followed by other towns in Massachusetts, and then by other places around what is now the United States. But Great Barrington gets the palm for being there first. And Church Street, as I mentioned, was one of the places involved, and that's where W.E.B. Du Bois grew up later in the 19th century, and that's actually where I lived at a time in my boyhood. So, the Declaration of Independence, as I've said repeatedly, adumbrates a conspiracy theory. It's all based on a conspiracy theory. The long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evincing a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, you got to throw off that government. And the conclusion, Thomas Jefferson, as edited and directed by Benjamin Franklin and some others, the history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having indirect object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. So absolute despotism and absolute tyranny, but through all different governments, right? People change, governments change, policy remains the same. So does that mean that Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were kooks, conspiracy buffs, paranoids? Well, let's also look at Bernard Bailyn of Harvard and his book, The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution, 1967. His conclusion is that the American Revolution is based on a single unifying conspiracy theory, actually coming from the British political writer Edmund Burke, who was quite respectable in many quarters today. They had made similar allegations about the British government in a slightly different context, but the conspiracy then focused on George III and his court, and this was the unifying belief of the right wing of the American Revolution, the left wing, the center, all of them believed this. So the idea is that the policies of Great Britain are not just mistaken or even evil, they violate the principles on which freedom rested, and there was a surreptitious effort by plotters against liberty, both in England and America. So, George Washington, in his the Fairfax Resolution of 1774, along with George Mason, not the greatest, and bought by his university, bought by Koch today, Washington says there was a, quote, regular systematic plan of oppression. The British government was endeavoring by every piece of art and despotism to fix the shackles of slavery upon us. Now, we'll talk about slavery in a minute. Washington says, beyond the smallest doubt, these measures are the result of deliberation, conspiracy. I am as fully convinced as I am of my own existence that there has been a regular systematic plan formed to enforce them. Now, I'm reading from Chapter 13 of 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in USA. Get the 5th edition. Actually, if you want this in Chapter 13, any edition will be okay. But if you're going to buy it, get the 5th edition if you can find it. Thomas Jefferson wrote a pamphlet in 1774, a series of oppressions done by the British, begun at a specified period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers, too plainly proves a deliberate and systematic plan of reducing us to slavery, 1774. John Adams, 1774, quote, the conspiracy was first regularly formed and begun to be executed in 1763 or 4. The conspiracy was profound, secret, dark, and deep. It was a junto conspiracy, and it was a junta, a secret committee. And, of course, the Essex junto or Essex junta in Massachusetts was an example of this stuff a little bit later. Governor Bernard of Massachusetts said a faction has organized a conspiracy against the Customs Administration. It is a secret, power-hungry cabal. Let's see. You get the idea. The explosion of long smoldering fears of ministerial conspiracy was by no means an exclusively American phenomenon. It was experienced in England too. So that's Bernard Bailyn, who got the Bancroft Prize in American history, a Harvard professor. This was before the shackles of political correctness came down on us. Let's also add that Lincoln alleged a conspiracy by President Polk, which I believe is amply demonstrated, to start the war with Mexico in 1847, I guess, 1846, sorry. And we also know that the most famous speech in American political history, Lincoln's House Divided speech, also adumbrates a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. And let's see if we can get the good quote from that. He goes through a bunch of these people. We cannot absolutely know that all these exact adaptations are the result of pre-concert. Now, Washington says deliberation. Lincoln says pre-concert. But when we see a lot of framed timbers, different portions of which we know have been gotten out at different times and places by different workmen, by Stephen Douglas, Senator, Democrat Party leader, presidential candidate, Franklin Pierce, president, Roger Taney, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, author of the Dred Scott decision, and James Buchanan, president under which secession occurred. We can see that these timbers joined together, they exactly make the frame of a house or a mill. In such a case, we find it impossible not to believe that Stephen Douglas and Franklin Pierce and Roger Taney and James Buchanan all understood each other from the beginning and all worked upon a common plan or draft drawn before the first lick was struck, says Abraham Lincoln in the House Divided speech. So, gosh, you tell me about whether it's possible to do political analysis. If you're dealing with an oligarchy, the obvious thing is there's got to be pre-concert or deliberation. So that's the Declaration of Independence. And remember, we also have to thank the international powers that made this possible. France joined the United States in 1778, and we'll review the three countries, really, that get the thanks of a grateful America on July 4th. And we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we've done our commentary on the American Revolution and that vigorous intellectual life that allowed people to see deliberation and pre-concert without being slandered as paranoids and kooks and conspiracy theorists. Although I have to admit, there are lots and lots of people who are kooks and paranoids who are out there selling conspiracy theories today. Let's not forget little Ron Paul, the infamous leprechaun, who's out there telling you that you should put your future under the control of his very dubious stockbroker, a guy who has been a firm which has been fined by the United States government, the Securities and Exchange Commission, for essentially trying to rip off some people. This Stansberry fined $1.5 million. So Ron Paul is preaching the apocalypse. This we do not share, and it's not because of governments, Ron. It's because of finance oligarchs, bankers in particular, and of course the governments they control. That goes without saying. So the answer to that is, though, not to tear down the government, as Jeff Davis wanted to do, but build up a better one. Remember that song, right? Old Abe Lincoln came out the wilderness, and the key verse is, old Jeff Davis tore down the government many long years ago, but old Abe Lincoln built up a better one many long years ago. Occurred in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And yours truly is, I guess if I'm a native of anywhere, I'm a native of Great Barrington, Massachusetts. It is in western Massachusetts. It is the county seat of Berkshire County, and it's the place that is the first open resistance against British rule in North America. And let's just go to the center of Great Barrington. This place is now kind of a bohemian artist's colony, or good for rich people from New York City, but that was not always the case. You have Main Street, you have the courthouse. Now, I used to live on Church Street. We'll say a few words about that in a second. But we have the intolerable acts. We have the tea taxes and all the rest of it. Complete assault on self-government. And the Crown, King George III, appointed a governor. The governor was his to appoint, and then the governor would impose by decree all judges, sheriffs, and marshals. No town meetings except by consent of the governor. All agenda items approved by the governor in advance, otherwise nothing. And the courts were made responsible for. First of all, we got to say a few things about the American Revolution, right? Because there once was one. Actually, let me say a couple of things about how this all started. It's important to remember that the first rebellion against tyrannical British rule in North America